Because those are the kinds of things that bring on shame. Those are the kinds of things that bring on fear. And if we hang out in that area long enough, we begin to believe this lie that we are defined by the things that we don't want anybody else to know. And in Romans 3, Paul will identify some of these false stories about ourselves, these false narratives, these things we've come to believe about who we are. And he's going to grab that, and he's going to pull it apart a little bit, and he's going to say something like this: you know what? Those stories aren't true. The best way to understand who you are is to understand who we are in light of who God is. So when Paul uses words like restored or ransomed or released or redeemed, he's talking about emancipation. He's talking about slaves being set free. So then to redeem someone is to buy them out of slavery. It's to vindicate them, to release them, to liberate them, to rescue them from their trouble, and to bring them home. So when Paul is using these words, he's got a place in mind as well. And as he begins to unpack and unfurl this story of God, he's saying at the crux of this story, Jesus becomes the place and the means by which our sins are forgiven. So in this Kairos moment, Jesus becomes the place where sins are neutralized. In this Kairos moment, Jesus is the place where humanity is made whole and restored. In this Kairos moment, Jesus is the place where creation and creator are bound together as one once again. So as we begin to understand who we are in light of who God is, Romans asks you and I, it says, do you know the great lover? And do you know that he loves you? Do you know that he has heard and seen everything you have ever said? He has been in every room that you have ever been in. He knows all about you, yet he still loves you. He's crazy about you. Romans 3 asks us, do you know the great Redeemer? And do you know that he has released, he has ransomed, he has rescued, he has redeemed you? You are no longer a slave to sin and to death. Those sins that used to hunt you down, you don't have to be owned by them anymore. And death, don't let that scare you anymore, because Jesus also squashed that. So Romans 3 asks us, are you still experiencing these Kairos moments? Are you aware of what Jesus is up to and what he's doing? Is there that electric sort of feeling? Are you submitting yourself to what Jesus is doing out there and inside of you? This, friends, is the true story of God. And by it, we can understand the true story of ourselves. This is a fancy way of saying that you not only carry this message, but actually, you are the message. That people see, hear, feel, taste, experience God by how they experience you and me. So that's why Paul says, be careful with it. That there is potential for you and I to sell ourselves back into the slavery that used to bind us. Be careful. It could happen. Know what you're capable of. Worship becomes the response to being justified. Why? Because worship interrupts the course of the world. Through worship, the Christian community testifies that the world is not its own. Or in other words, worship sets the story straight. It reminds us who God is, and it reminds us who we are in light of who God is. Worship interrupts the usual flow of things. Worship interrupts the usual way of thinking and the usual way of doing business. Worship interrupts the usual way of how you treat your spouse, and the usual way you handle money, and the usual way you manage your time. Worship interrupts me getting my own way. Worship interrupts me just looking out for myself.